Hello everyone, Helen here. Thanks for coming to join me today. I hope you're doing okay. I'm here in my craft room, which if you haven't visited me before, I live in Durham in the northeast of England, and I just love sharing all the different kinds of things that I do, which does involve a lot of knitting and crochet and other crafts. And I also like taking you out and about to interesting places that I've been to, which I think that you would like to go to as well. And that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to take you on a day out. We had such a lovely day out recently. I was with my husband Phil and with his mum. It was a day filled with creative inspiration and a chance to delve a bit deeper into our knitting and textile history and heritage. So I hope you'll find it interesting too. And maybe you've been there before and you don't mind revisiting, I'm sure, because it's an excellent place. And if you haven't been, well, you can come on this virtual visit with me now. So we had about an hour and a half's drive from Durham across the Pennines and into the Yorkshire Dales. We went in the camper van, actually. You never know when you might need to stop for a cup of tea. And we soon arrived at our first destination, which was Farfield Mill near Sedbergh in Cumbria. The mill was first built in 1837, which is the year that Queen Victoria came to the throne, by a man called Joseph Dover. And the mill's main job was as a weaving mill, making all sorts of cloth. It's been an arts and heritage centre since 2001, and it's home to artist studios, a little heritage museum, a cafe, and a large shop containing lots of handcrafted items and artwork. We headed first of all to the cafe for refreshments and a quick snack. It's a very pleasant place to relax, and there was a good choice of light snacks and cakes and lunches on offer. I really like the rustic atmosphere in there. We did return a little later to the cafe and we had a really nice lunch as well of quiche and salad. The mill building that houses the Arts and Heritage Centre has 4 floors and was used as a weaving mill for about 100 years, and it passed down through the generations of the Dover family. There's several mills along the valley, as you can see here, alongside the River Dee and its tributaries. Farfield is on the River Clough. It's a very picturesque spot and we enjoyed watching the river racing by, although when the mill was in use I imagine the river must have been much fuller and faster than it is today to be able to drive the machinery in the mill. Its water wheel was replaced in 1896 with a Gilbert Gilkes & Co. Vortex water turbine. That's a bit of a mouthful. So they still used water to drive it, but it was more efficient for the machinery. And the company who fitted it is actually still in business today, and in recent years it helped with the restoration of the Victorian turbine. Inside the mill there's several weaving looms on display, and most, if not all of them, I think, are still in use, although no one was doing any weaving on the day that we visited. There was a useful film to explain the whole process of weaving cloth, which featured one of the looms that is on display there, which did help to bring the still machines to life a bit. And I learnt quite a lot from watching the film. There are other old weaving machines dotted around the mill too, including one that was moved here from somewhere near Oxford, and which I think was mainly used to make blankets. Farfield Mill provided steady employment for the local people, although the early 19th century was not a time of pleasant work conditions or restrictions on the minimum age of the workers. It's known that sometimes children as young as 3 worked in the mills for up to 16 hours a day. However, it is believed that children working at Farfield Mill were treated less harshly than at many other mills. In the later 19th century, mill owners pushed their workers very hard and brought in many strict rules and regulations seen here in this list of rules which was found at Farfield. Workers might be fined for dropping bobbins on the floor or for two people being found together in the necessary, which means toilet in case you haven't heard that term before. In 1909 there was a fire at the mill and many of the workers had to transfer temporarily to nearby mills while the mill was being fixed up again. But this photo here shows the workers who remained at Farfield just after the fire. And it's quite thought-provoking looking into the faces of these people from over 100 years ago, wondering just what their lives were really like, and thinking about how harshly life might have treated them, and wondering whether or not they were content and just accepted things the way they were because they didn't know any different. The little heritage museum in the mill just hints at some of the things that the owners and workers would have encountered in their daily work, from the office to the equipment used for weaving, such as these shuttles, and these patterns for the woven cloth that they were producing. It was interesting to see some actual samples of cloth that had been produced there, which were sent far and wide. For example, there was some fabric made for Queen Victoria's horses. Part of the mill's current function as an arts centre is to provide a large studio for modern-day weavers up on the top floor, which is a lovely airy space filled with modern looms of several varieties. Again, none of the weavers were there when we visited, but it was lovely to see some of their work on display, as well as projects that they were working on. It was also interesting to see some examples of lace making on display. It's not something I've ever tried, although it looks fascinating. This big studio is also a place where you can attend all sorts of workshops on a whole variety of different crafts, not just fibre-related ones, and these take place all through the year. The mill also offers small studio spaces for individual artists and craftspeople, and we saw quite a wide range of the arts, from lino-cut printing, with some really beautifully detailed prints of images of the natural world, to patchwork quilting. There were all sorts of gorgeous quilts on display, as you can see here, to machine knitting, where I loved seeing these beautiful hats, amongst other things. There was such a rich array of colours. There were some fascinating things on display in the exhibition room. I love this very interesting wreath, which incorporates natural objects such as stones, shells and fossils and shards of old pottery into the felted shapes. I looked at it for ages, trying to spot all the things that were hidden in it. I really liked some of the sculptures on display, from ceramic figures to this tiny little metal figure set into a piece of wood, to ones made of an assortment of materials, such as these beautiful silhouettes set into a very interesting structure. I'm not really sure what it was made of. Then there was this fascinating floral and fibre hanging structure that caught my eye. I think that would make quite a statement in the right setting. There were many beautiful handmade items for sale in the shop, some made by the resident artists in the mill and other things by local craftspeople. The shop covered almost the entire floor and we spent quite a long time perusing everything. I did come away with one or two things, which I'll show you later, but let's go and have a little wander around the shop together. It was on a visit to this little heritage museum a few years ago when I first learnt about the knitting traditions of this area. In 1834, the writer Robert Southey had written a story called The Terrible Knitters of Dent, and by terrible he meant amazingly productive, fast knitters. Everyone knitted, men, women and children, and many used the devices known as knitting sticks to enable them to knit faster, even while they were on the move, tending to their farming duties. They're shaped like a goose wing, and the devices were attached to their belt or waistband, and were often specially carved by men to give to their betrothed. When sitting down to knit, the knitters of Dent would rock back and forth while they worked, and that's a style of knitting called swaving. Phil bought me this very interesting little pamphlet, which is mainly a transcript of a documentary that was made quite some time ago, featuring the two last known knitters of Dent, Elizabeth Middleton and Betty Hartley, and it includes the story that Robert Southey wrote. It's in Yorkshire dialect, so it's a little bit difficult to read, but it tells the tale of two little girls who were sent to Dent to learn how to knit. But they were so unhappy about having to spend all their time knitting that one snowy night they ran away from Dent and they walked the considerably long distance back to their home in Langdale in the Lake District. The local villagers were visited on a regular basis by carriers who collected knitted items to be taken to market. And in the nearby town of Kirby Stephen, in fact, the main square is called Stocking Square. And the carriers delivered more wool to the villagers. It was known as bump, and it was an oily off-white fleece from the sheep breed called rough fell sheep, who originate from Kendal in the southern fells of the Lake District, are particularly hardy. They've got horns and a distinctive patchy black face and a white nose, and apparently they are really good-natured, and the ewes make excellent mothers. I was really keen to go and visit the village of Dent, so that's where we headed when we left Farfield Mill. Dent is the only village in a valley called Dentdale, and it is a very beautiful setting indeed. We began by visiting the Heritage Centre and Tea Room, a very cosy place filled with historical artefacts, and there's also a little museum which was about to close when we arrived, so we're saving that for another visit. We really enjoyed our tea and scones in the charming surroundings. The Heritage Centre is also home to a shop called The Wool Shed, so of course I had to go and investigate. As the name suggests, it's a very wool-themed shop, packed with all sorts of yarn and sheep-related things, including a video of a couple of sheep breeds that are kept locally, Swaledale and Blue-Faced Leicester. And I might just have come away with one or two sheep-related items, which I'll show you a little bit later. Dent really is one of the most attractive villages I've ever visited, and I guess it helped that we were seeing it on a sunny day. There's a lovely little church, St Andrew's, which dates as far back as the 12th century, although the building we see today is a much refurbished and restored version of the 15th century church that replaced the earlier one. As I wandered along the cobbled streets, I tried to imagine the place being filled with people sitting by their homes knitting, or even wandering along the street driving a flock of sheep while carrying on knitting, or overhearing conversations or singing from groups of knitters who gathered together on upstairs balconies called galleries. The little pamphlet that I mentioned earlier includes the lyrics of some of the songs that would have been sung while the people knitted. The songs actually helped them to knit faster when they were trying to keep to the pulse of the melodies. I wish more of the musical notation had been included in the pamphlet so that I could give you an idea of how the songs might have sounded. There's just this one with music, and it's about tarry woo. And tarry woo refers to the greasy salve made of tar and butter that was rubbed into the sheep's fleece to guard against disease, and made it quite hard to prepare the fleece and make it into nice wool. Tarry-woo, oh tarry-woo is ill to spin. Card it well, oh card it well, ere ye begin. When it's carded, woven, spun, then your work is nearly done. When it's woven, dressed and clean, it will be clothing for a queen. The cobbled streets and houses have been there since the early 1700s, when Dent was a relatively prosperous place, with most of the prosperity due to the industrious knitters of the village, whose garments were sold far and wide, until the dawn of the mechanical age, when machine knitting took over and factories produced goods even faster, a lot faster, than the incredible inhabitants of Dent. So reluctantly we left the idyllic charm of the village and we headed home along the Dentdale Valley, which was looking so vibrantly green. I loved the reflections of the leafy trees on the inside of the van. And we had one final treat as we rose up out of the valley and paused to look back at the sun shining down on the green fields of Dentdale. It really did take our breath away. And since I came back from that lovely outing, I've been spending quite a bit more time researching the knitters of the Yorkshire Dales. And I was really pleased to be able to buy a copy of this book here, The Old Hand Knitters of the Dales. And hopefully at some point I'll share a bit more of the information that is in here. But it's a really, really interesting book. So yeah, I was very pleased to find that. It was originally published in 1951 and then went out of print, and then it's just more recently been reprinted, and and thankfully it has, because it's got some very, very interesting information in it. So that's great. And I promised I would tell you what I had been tempted to buy while we were on our day out. So when we were at Farfield Mill, I bought some handmade soap which is just locally made in the nearby town of Sedbergh, just a very short distance from the mill. And I do love handmade soap, so I was really pleased to find that, and some new scents that I hadn't tried before. And I bought a gorgeous little turned wooden trinket dish made from bur oak. And if you don't know what bur oak is, the bur is one of those big kind of wibbly growths on the side of oak trees that you see sometimes. And when you use that as wood, it has lots of intricate patterns in it. Really beautiful. And also my mother-in-law very generously treated me to a skein of yarn as well, which is very beautiful. It's hand painted, which I don't know anything at all about dyeing yarn or colouring yarn. So it's hand painted done differently. If you know, tell me in the comments. I kind of imagine them painting the dye on rather than dipping it into a vat. Well, I don't know. Maybe hand painted is the same as hand dyed. I don't know. It's very beautiful anyway. And I think I'm going to use that to make a shawl. So yeah, watch this space. And then when we went to the village of Dent and went into the shop called the Wool Shed, I couldn't resist a couple of placemats that featured the local sheep. And so I'm going to enjoy using those. And they will remind me of that lovely visit as well. And I did buy a couple of balls of yarn as well. I just love it when I find somewhere where the yarn is so local to the place where it's being sold. So I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with it. But it's just really nice to have it. And when I've made it, it'll be really special because, you know, when you know exactly where it's come from, it's really, really nice. Anyway, I think that's it for today. I will be back very soon, but until then, take good care of yourself. Keep nice and busy, but not too busy. And I'll be back again soon. Okay then, bye.